For more, let's speak to Professor Cécile Coquet-Mokoko from the University of Saint-Quentin, joining us from Versailles. Professor Coquet, I'd like to begin by asking you, Joe Biden's team has been pushing this message of unity, but perhaps the greatest unifying force at this convention was Donald Trump. Just tell us, how divided are the Democrats with Joe Biden as the official candidate?
Joe Biden is a relatively classical Democratic candidate. As you reminded your listeners, this is not his first time aiming for the American presidency. He is not, he's very careful not to be branded as a diehard Antifa, as a rabid leftist, which is precisely what the Trump campaign is trying to portray Democrats as. Now, he has to listen to the activists embodied by AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or Stacey Abrams, all the people from the Black Lives Matter movement. And he knows that he also needs the support of Elizabeth Warren and her supporters, as well as the Bernie Sanders crowd. So there is very often this image of the Democratic National Convention being a big tent. The speech that we've heard last night is a relatively traditional speech that calls for decency and compassion, which Joe Biden claims to embody. But I think that Democratic voters, especially those that are not so committed, will need something a little bit more exciting to make sure that they actually mail in their ballots or go to the polls.
Yeah, on that last note, you mentioned his speech. One of the biggest issues we hear in the United States is about a candidate appearing presidential. Did Joe Biden look up to the task to you?
He did certainly reconnect to historical figures such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he tried to sound protective. That's really what struck me when listening to his speech, when he repeated several times, "I will not let this happen," regarding foreign interference in the American voting process. It is difficult without the support of cheering crowds, of course. But what really struck me was his insistence on going by a very well-known American playbook that all students of American rhetoric know well, which is the American Jeremiad. Namely, you start with the observation that the country is in a terrible state. By the way, Donald Trump had spoken of the American carnage 4 years ago. And we have the exact same spiel, so to speak. You show your listeners how badly the country is doing, how terrible the situation is. And of course, in this current context, it doesn't take too much of an effort to describe the perfect storm, as Joe Biden did. Afterwards, you need to convince your listeners that this is the right time for America to resume its course to being the leading force of the world, to being the beacon of other nations, and rise up to its mission. So we heard Joe Biden going through the steps of this playbook, but I didn't really find anything that changed much from traditional Democratic speeches, to be honest.
Well, as you broach the subject of the art of rhetoric, needless to say, Trump is an unconventional orator. How do you think Joe Biden will fare against him in the debates?
It really is a question of how he will show his opponent as trying to crave attention and being all about himself. So pushing Trump into his own flaws and shedding more light, cruder light, on how incapable of any compassion and empathy Trump is. And we hear these talking points from the Biden campaign very much. So I believe that this is where he's going to push him.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Cécile Coquet-Mokoko.
Thanks for having me.